So this really allows us to open up the terrain as widely as we might like. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank Marc for such a rousing end. Actually, quotations from Graham I had not recalled. It's always a pleasure. So, what I'd like to do now is ask if there's anyone here who would like to pose a question for Dr. Raboy, please. And we'll have some sort of rough, I'll try to keep the speaker's order, and I'm not sure, do I have an instruction about how to take the question so it's taped? What can we do?
I think the best is just to speak loudly.
Speak loudly with the big stick. Okay, go ahead. Please, sir. Yes.
Mr. Raboy, I wanted to, in terms of missed opportunities or ones ahead, wanted to ask about regulation of media, and in particular print media in Vancouver, because as you know, CanWest seems to have a hammerlock on media in this area, apparently assisted by Mr. Kretchen. And I think it's fair to say that the quality of the media, the two dailies, the Province and the Sun, are abysmal by world standards. And I understand that there's a phenomenon called gutting of the newsroom that is widespread amongst media companies in North America, so that the quality is severely lacking in terms of information for decision making and the public commons and so on, establishment of that. In view of these phenomena, I was wondering what you would recommend in terms of regulation of media, especially print, because that has very widespread impact as opposed to, say, some of these web-based alternatives, which are nice and available but not effectively used by the vast majority of the populace. I'm also, in that context, wondering about regulating media companies so that they own properties in particular jurisdictions that are restricted to their ownership. I'm thinking of the allegation I've heard, I haven't seen any facts to support it, that CanWest uses Vancouver market to cross-subsidize its empire building elsewhere. That is, money that's made here is sucked out to the detriment of the local readers and the quality of the media here to benefit CanWest, and that ultimately the detriment of the local readers. How to stop that, that's what I'm wondering about.
Interesting, thank you.
Yeah, I've got quite a few thoughts on concentration of media ownership, but before I give you my own thoughts, I want to just point out, first of all, this is a tremendously complex area, and it's made especially complex as soon as you take any account whatsoever of the acquired rights of the corporations that are concerned. The Lincoln Committee proposed to the government that it spend 1 year studying the vast complexity of the situation of media ownership in Canada, and that it come out with a policy that takes into account all of these things. That is one of the proposals that has been before the government since 2003, which there hasn't been a peep. So the first thing is to actually come up with some kind of coherent proposals that take account of the existing situation. I mean, one could refer to the situation in other countries where you have, for example, thresholds on market share that one corporation is able to achieve. The problem in this country is that we have no policies whatsoever. We have no thresholds, so we're always going after the fact, bemoaning the situation that we're in now and saying, well, now it's too late. Now there's nothing that we can do, and the companies have invested, and so on and so forth. My own thoughts on this, I would say, first of all, no more cross-media ownership. Well, that's like a ridiculous proposal to me. I'm going to be laughed off any stage other than this one as a hopeless, unrealistic utopian. But basically, that's the way that we need to go. I mean, if you look at a corporation like BCE and what they own, I mean, even 10 years ago, not to mention 20 years ago, it would have been absolutely unthinkable in this country for the largest telephone operator to own the largest television network in one of the two linguistic groups, one of the two existing national newspapers, and let's go on and on and on. It would be absolutely unthinkable. Well, now that they do, of course you say, well, we can't tinker with their acquired rights and so on. So first of all, let's say no more cross ownership. Now, you weren't talking about cross-ownership, you were only talking about the newspaper sector, but my understanding of the situation in Vancouver, and correct me if it's changed recently, is that there's also a tremendous problem of cross-subsidization and overlap between the CanWest papers and the global television station, which is the market leader in local news and information. The Vancouver market was actually singled out by the Lincoln Committee in its report as the absolutely worst situation in the country, I'm sorry to say. Thresholds, limits, if not the outright abolition of cross ownership. The Kent Commission on concentration in the newspaper industry in 1980 recommended that a newspaper owner not be allowed to own broadcasting license and vice versa. And this was briefly, very, very briefly, for a time under the Trudeau government, this was actually policy, because the Trudeau government had a bee in its bonnet about the Irving interests in New Brunswick. And the minute the conservatives came in 1983, Mulroney abrogated that directive, and the rest is history. But when the Lincoln Committee met, Tom Kent, who's now a distinguished fellow at Queen's University, came before it, and they asked him, Mr. Kent, what do you think we should do about concentration in media ownership? And he said, make them divest. And the MPs looked at each other and they said, well, you can't be serious. And he says, yeah, I'm absolutely serious. Make them divest. So there you go. I mean, that's the answer. Now, find a political party that's willing to put that in their platform and run with it.
I begin to have quite a speakers list, so I'd like to go over here and leave to my colleague Alison Deal.
Thanks, Marc. I was very interested in your lecture, and thank you. I noticed that you described a paradox in Canadian federal communication regulation, whereby, by and large, one can say that the federal apparatus has been captured by private interests and largely operates in their interest. And at the same time, occasionally, in the act of performing in their interest, our federal government takes initiative in such areas as the diversity accord that we've just seen emerge. You alluded to the debate around the next round of the WSIS and the way in which that was reported in the press and disparaged in particular by the American media. I'm concerned that the UN-led process may also similarly have been captured by private interests, such as Cisco Systems, and by the mysterious gatekeeping processes that allow or don't allow national representatives to be selected to take part in those debates. We had a panel here a couple of years ago in which Leslie Shade from Concordia, who was involved in part of the WSIS process, described for us some of the murky background to all of that process. So in trying to remain positive about what the United Nations or UN agencies might be able to do for us, can you say anything that's both positive but also realistic about the degree to which those private interests are already involved? Thanks.
I'm temperamentally incapable of being realistic. I think what you're saying is true with regard to the United Nations system, but the United Nations system, as I've come to observe it during the last couple of years, is amazingly rich and complex, much more so than any one than the situation in any one country. And of course, as soon as any policy-making venue becomes important, the private sector is going to be right in there, and they are well organized and well-oiled, and they're going to promote their interests. And that's just part of the game. And we can either resign ourselves to it and, grow flowers,
or we can engage with that. And I mean, what's interesting in what's happening now at the international level is that a lot of the pressures for democratization that we went through in countries like Canada, to the point where we're now very blasé about it, are really front burner issues. And there's space there for new players to come into the picture. And whenever that happens, you get possibilities of strange alliances. You know, you'll have a set of international NGOs which find that they've got the same view about Microsoft as the government of Brazil, and so they can try to push something forward that way. So it's, I mean, I think it's a really, I mean, I really believe that it's important and essential to engage at that level, and it's going to become even more important in the coming years. And of course, you know, let's not have any illusions about the private sector. But interestingly, what's happening is that, of course, the private sector knows no borders, right? And they don't care. They also have no values other than profit. So Microsoft can make deals with the government of China, you know, to block access to any website that has the word democracy on it or whatever, right? And at the same time, they can be, you know, the shoo-shoo of the, you know, of the American government and their projects for wiring the world, you know. So I mean, I think there are, of course, those problems. We have to be, you know, really aware of them, but we have to invest in those spaces.
Thank you. Over here.
Just a brief preamble to my question. In support of Canadian media, I about a year ago wrote an editorial called "Why America Needs Canada to Keep its Media Canadian," in trying to oppose what Izzy's son Lenny's trying to do in Ottawa right now, getting rid of the ban on foreign ownership. In that article, I listed all kinds of stories that our American friends would never have heard without us breaking them here in Canada on their behalf. So we're doing some things right. But back in March of 2002 is my question. I was the vice president of the Canadian Association for Media Education. I got a call from this woman who was very distraught. She was sitting at home in Richmond watching X-Files at 8:04 p.m. on March 4th. And up comes a movie from the Space Channel, Chum Network, advertising the movie Vixen. This is a movie that makes incest look like a very attractive lifestyle. So she writes a letter to Chum, that doesn't hear anything, calls us up, we write a letter to Chum, she gets an immediate apology back and nothing further. So we helped her put a complaint together to the CRTC, which they very kindly sidestepped completely and sent over to CSBC. Right. Well, CSBC, after enough letters and phone calls, they started to take it very seriously and decided to try Chum Television on this on this violating of their purely voluntary self-enforced regulatory code, and found themselves in September of 2003 to be guilty of violating it, and they sentenced Chum's Space Channel to have to read that verdict on air. Twice! One during prime time and one in the small hours. And I'm sitting here saying, didn't we just give them some free copy? That's the only penalty that Chum Television got for making incest look like an attractive lifestyle to our children at 8:04 p.m. during the watershed hours in BC. And all they can say is it wasn't watershed hours in Toronto. Can you please tell me, do you really believe these people are capable of self-regulation?
No. I think, the CRTC has put an elaborate system in place so that it shouldn't have to make moral judgments on, or political judgments for that matter, on the content of programming.
Incest is a criminal. It's a violation of the criminal code. It's not freedom of speech.
Okay, that's a good point. I think in the case of, I think they do have the jurisdiction to intervene in any clear violation of the criminal code. So, is that the point? I mean, your question was about self-regulation. Was whether or not the industry can self-regulate. I mean, I think it's inevitable, and it's not necessarily a bad thing to move towards self-regulation in the area of content, so long as the CRTC is there and is willing to act the way it did in the Schwa case. You know, I think that's really important, and that's a case, by the way, which is being looked at around the world in astonishment. I mean, not only is it the only time that the CRTC has acted in that way, but there aren't many similar examples of that type of action in international regulatory jurisprudence. And yet, if you look at the details of the case, how could they have not done that after years of violation of every soft attempt to get that station to conform to regulations? So, in that sense, there has to be, and we certainly still have in Canada, you know, the ultimate oversight of the system by the CRTC. And I think it's important that it stay that way. I just want to mention, by the way, in the preamble to your question, you referred to foreign ownership regulations, and that's something that fell out of the talk, unfortunately. I think foreign ownership regulations are absolutely crucial to, everything that we know as Canadian media, or as media in this country, shall I say. And we have to be very vigilant about that. I mean, nothing is going to happen, I'm pretty sure nothing is going to happen as long as we have a minority government, but it's very high on the agenda in Ottawa, the liberalization, removing of foreign ownership restrictions, at least on the side of distribution, as though there was no relation between carriage and content. Yeah.
A question over here, please. And I'm going to start a new rule. Please introduce yourself so that we know. And I just want to catch your name, sir.
Tom Crean.
Tom Green. And the gentleman from the blue back there.
Tony Dunn.
Tony Dunn. Thank you very much. Just for the record. Thank you. Okay, Bob.
I'm Bob Hackett at SFU, and Mark, I like the name of your talk, Making Media. I just last week finished a book called Remaking Media. It's about the struggle to democratize public communication, very much along the same lines of what you're talking about, in which we looked at media activism in Britain, the United States, and Canada, and it appears that there indeed is a growing media reform movement in the United States. I wonder if you see much signs of that in Canada, because I don't really, to anything like the same extent.
Well, get out there, Bob.
Well, sorry, right?
Close the book. Get out there.
Thoughts about why that exists and why it exists in Canada to build that?
Yeah, I don't see it in Canada, actually, and it's really it's deplorable. I mean, this is what I said very early on. I mean, I think, you know, people like us have to put these issues, you know, raise the temperature with regard to these issues so that people understand what's going on and that it's important and that they have to get involved. Because ultimately, you know, and again, to go back to Graham Spry and the Canadian Radio League, whatever we have today, you know, we have because a social movement forced the government to act in the 1930s. I mean, it didn't fall from the sky. I mean, we were going down the road. I mean, our radio stations were affiliating with American networks, and you know, there was no production going on. So, I mean, basically, it's up to us, you know. And I can't really tell you why. I mean, I could, you know, pontificate and theorize on why there's a movement in the United States and there isn't one here. I mean, maybe the situation is that much worse in the United States, which is possible, but it's, you know, I mean, we've identified a lot of problems with our situation here. Certainly, it's something, you know, Bob McChesney, former Spry lecturer, who is one of the founders and leading driving forces of the American media reform movement, he tells people, make media reform your second priority. You know, because people are concerned about the environment or feminism or AIDS or whatever. You know, I mean, media is just not a high priority enough issue for many people. But It's so important to all of those other issues. So, you know, the strategy somehow of getting it onto the agenda, onto the activist agenda as well. You know, the communication rights movement has been struggling for years and finally making some incursions in getting the issues, media-related issues, onto the agenda of the World Social Forum. World Social Forum activists are not generally aware that these issues are so relevant to everything that they care about. So there's a long road ahead.